Hi YouTube, it's Kathy and this is my weekly entertainment wrap-up for October 4th through 10th. This week I read 3 books, I watched 3 shows, and I listened to 1 book. I really hope that this doesn't become a running trend in my wrap-ups, because my last wrap-up started very similarly in that last week I forgot to talk about a book. I track my reading on 5 or 6 different apps or spreadsheets, but the most important one for this is the list where I just write down things as I finish them. And of course I remember to write it down on all of the lists except for the one that I use for these videos. Last week I read a graphic novel called Skim. This takes place in 1995 in a high school somewhere in Canada, and it's about this girl's experience. It's about her realizing that she's queer and having a crush on a female teacher, and something happens there, but we don't really get to see their relationship on the page, and it's also never addressed with any of her friends. Not that she has very many, but she never brings it up with a family member or a friend, and that made this kind of a weird read for me. It also heavily has to do with the suicide of the ex-boyfriend of one of the girls at her school. So all around trigger warnings for things. The one thing that this book really had going for it is it did talk about the racism that Asian kids faced in the 90s in Canada, so it was valuable for that. But because we didn't get any resolution as to what was going on with that relationship with a teacher, it just wasn't my favorite read. On to what I read this week. Firstly, I read The Midwich Cuckoos, which is a book from the 1950s. Not my usual jam, but I needed something with paranormal happenings, and this happened to fit the bill. And for some reason it was in my collection, although I have no idea how I acquired it. This book takes place primarily in a small English town called Midwich, and one day this resident goes out of town for the day, and when he comes back, you can't really get back into the town, and he doesn't understand why. It turns out that if anyone goes kind of into this perimeter of the town, they just kind of pass out. After about a day and a half of this, everyone wakes up and they're pretty much fine until about a month later, when all the people with uteruses of childbearing age realize that they are all pregnant. Between this book and the horror movies I watched last week, I'm really glad I got my period. This was an interesting premise. A lot of it was people just sitting and talking about the situation, which was interesting to read. It felt really, really dense, and I just wanted the plot to progress, but that could have been a me thing. Overall, I enjoyed it. I also read Let Me Lie by Claire Mackenzie. This, like all of her books that I've read so far, has 2 main perspectives. The first one being somebody who is in a crisis, and the second one being somebody who is on the police force. Our victim in a crisis has had a really hard couple of years. Both of her parents died from a parent's suicide 7 months apart from each other, and she went to a grief counselor, and a few sessions in he had to recuse himself because he found her attractive. They ended up going on a date. They ended up pregnant together. Now they have a baby. On the anniversary of her mother's death, she receives a card in the post that says, "Happy Anniversary! Suicide! Think again." This obviously doesn't sit right with her, so it prompts her to go to the police station, and we meet our other main perspective, who is a man who used to be a detective and has since retired and basically just works the desk. So he's basically a civilian, but he has all this background in being a police officer. When it comes to his home life, his wife has bipolar disorder, so she is in and out of mental health facilities, and he is constantly afraid that she is going to commit suicide. This one had some excellent twists and turns, as Claire Mackintosh's books always do. Since this was my 3rd of hers and I was reading it in print, I think I trained myself to look for what the major twist might be, and I happened to be right, but that didn't make me feel disappointed that I got it ahead of time. I was still very intrigued as to how the situation was going to work out. I always highly recommend her books, and this is no different. This week I also read the novella Depart, Depart by Sim Kern, who is a fellow booktuber if you would like to follow their channel. This takes place during a natural disaster in Texas that washes away our protagonist's home and friends and possibly family. He's been evacuated to a sports stadium complex where he and many other people who have lost their homes are staying until they can figure out what they're doing, and he and a bunch of other queer people kind of make this one corner of the stadium basically the queer neighborhood of the building. However, the thing he refuses to tell his new friends is the reason that he wasn't in his building when the water hit, and that's that he believes his great-grandfather, in child form, told him to get out of the building. Basically, he's having visions of this child who he believes is his great-grandfather, who was able to escape from Nazi Germany. This character sits right at the intersection of being trans and Jewish during this horrific event in his life. And this was a highly impactful story because you had to think of what would you do in this situation to survive when you also have these people who are hating on you for who you are. The paranormal aspect of this was also based on Jewish folklore, so I found that very, very interesting. On to the shows I watched this week. We finished the 6th season of Parks and Rec and went into the 7th season, and as I'm watching the 7th season, I'm wondering if I ever actually watched the entire 7th season. I'm pretty sure that I only watched the end of the 6th, so this is new to me. 7th season is a little bit weird because most of them don't work together anymore, and it's a flash forward by 3 years, and there's new characters, and yeah, it's interesting. I'm not hating it, but it's definitely different. The other 2 shows I watched this week were both based on the works of Philip K. Dick. The first one is Electric Dreams. This is a show where all the episodes are self-contained, so I believe all of them are based off of one short story by Philip K. Dick. And we end up finishing all the episodes of this first season. The other show we picked up, because we had watched the first 3 episodes months ago and then just forgot to get back to it, was The Man in the High Castle. We finished the first season and then watched the entire 2nd season because might as well do it all in one go. The premise of this show is that the Nazis and the Japanese didn't lose the Second World War, and they have occupied a lot of the world, but most importantly from our standpoint, North America. The Nazis have most of the East Coast to the middle of the continent, and then there is a neutral zone, and then the Japanese are occupying the West Coast. This show can definitely be hard to watch because you are constantly seeing Nazis, which is, you know, not my favorite, and you're constantly seeing the politics of Nazis, which also not my favorite. I spend a lot of time watching this show just giving the TV the middle finger because, wow, just wow. What makes the show interesting is the interpersonal dynamics between the different characters, as well as this kind of spy organization, which is the resistance to the occupation, and these films that they keep finding and delivering to a man called the Man in the High Castle, or to Adolf Hitler because he's still around even though this is the 60s, or to the Japanese military, but it's my understanding they haven't seen many of these films, even though they are trying to acquire them so Hitler can't have them. There are some familiar faces in this series, especially in the 2nd season. We've got a couple of people that I know from Battlestar Galactica, and then the titular character, who I'm not going to wreck it for you, but I did not expect to see that guy in this show, especially as the titular character. On to what I listened to this week, which was If at Birth You Don't Succeed by Zach Anner. This is an autobiography, so it includes his time growing up with cerebral palsy and having some really interesting life experiences. Due to the spelling of his name and the fact that his name is Zach with an H, if you were to spell his name as a username, but to take out that first A and put a 4 in there, his name looks like Z4channer, which is a fluke of the internet that made it possible for him to be on the Oprah Winfrey Show for a competition. This was a competition show where you were pitching your own TV show, and whoever won the show got to produce their TV show. He's also been part of comedy troupes and other interesting projects, and I'm not going to wreck it for you because you should actually just read this book yourself. It was fantastic. I had never heard of Zach Anner before. I picked this up for the Disability Readathon, and now I feel like I need to go back and watch all of these projects. Not all of them are things that I am going to be overly impressed by. A lot of his humor used to be kind of shock jock humor, which is not my favorite, especially when it is punching down, which occasionally his humor in this book does. But I also got the sense from him that he is learning and he has evolved from the humor that he used to use when he was younger, so that's all we can expect, is for people to learn and grow. With the exception of those few cringy parts, this book was very funny and his life is very interesting, and I think that you should check this book out. That's it for this week. If you've read, watched, or listened to any of these, let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or a smiley face if you're on your keyboard. Some people have asked if there's a way to financially support this channel, so I set up a Ko-fi account, which is a digital tipping service. The link for that is down below, as well as the link to my PayPal and my Amazon wishlist in case you want to buy me a book. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!